Hello, welcome to Gardener's World and welcome to a blazingly hot Longmeadow. May was the driest month since records began, but things are still looking lush, even though the soil is dry, and the roses have been lapping up the sunshine, just like I have. This is a rose called Desdemona. It's an English rose, which is a rose that has a bushy, shrubby form, but keeps flowering. And this, as well as looking good, has an amazing scent. I'm told that it smells of myrrh. Well, I've never smelt myrrh, so I don't know. But if myrrh smells as good as this rose, then it's something special. And to keep roses going, to keep them flowering for as long as possible, the best thing you can possibly do is deadhead. It obviously helps to water and feed, but deadheading is the key. And as soon as a flower is spent, get a pair of secateurs and cut it back to a leaf or a flower bud. You get new regrowth with a new side shoot, and that will give you a new flower. On today's programme, we catch up with Frances on her allotment, where she's experimenting with ways to tackle the weeds.
I need to cover these mounds with something that will exclude the light, and I have 2 different materials to try and see which one works best.
And there's another chance to join Joe when he met an extraordinary plantswoman gardening against the odds in a Devon coastal garden.
It is our water feature, so we have to major on the water feature.
I have to say, that is some water feature.
And I shall be planting up the vegetable combination known as the Three Sisters, as well as creating a display of succulents in a container. Come on now. Forget-me-nots are one of those plants that, when they're in their full glory, they're a delight. But gradually you get less and less flower, so it's time to rip them out of these beds. As long as you leave one patch of forget-me-nots somewhere in the garden, there will be a mass of seedlings, and then in autumn you can redistribute them wherever you want them. And I want to make space in these borders. I want to continue that theme going through of the pale yellows, pale blue with touches of white. And I want to add a couple of annuals which will keep that theme going. Now, the first is a cosmos. This is Cosmos bipinnatus xanthos. And it's special because it was the first cosmos to have a truly soft yellow-coloured flower. And it's only been around for 5 years. Until then, the colours were much harder or else didn't flower very well at all. Pop them in, spacing about a foot or 2 apart. They're very robust plants. They grow to about 2 to 4 foot tall. They'll take most soils, as long as they get some sunshine, and keep flowering, if I keep deadheading them, for months. As well as the cosmos, I'm going to thread through these borders a French marigold. And this one is called Vanilla Cream. Now, these will grow in almost any soil as long as they get some sunshine. And this is a very, very sunny spot. Now, the soil here is neutral to alkaline. So one of the plants you don't see at Longmeadow are rhododendrons. But last May, we went to visit a garden absolutely filled with them.
My name is Colin Mugridge. I was brought up in an RAF family, and when I was 18, I joined the Royal Air Force as a pilot. now been retired 16 years. I was always very interested in plants. When I left the Royal Air Force, I was able to buy myself a property, and I chose as big a garden as I possibly could. In this garden were large plants, and they were rhododendrons, and that is where I got my interest from. I like rhododendrons because they're very showy plants. I believe they're one of the great flowering plants of the world. There are hundreds of rhododendrons in this garden. A lot of them planted out or most of them planted out in the borders, a lot of them in the conservatory, and a lot of them in pots. Here we have a series of different species here. The difference between a species and a hybrid is that a species is purebred. If I cross this plant with the same plant, I will end up with exactly the plant you see here. If I cross this species with a large leaf species, which you see above, you will end up with a hybrid. That is a cross between the two. Well, I always thought, what would happen if I crossed one rhododendron flower with another rhododendron flower, each one being completely different, and to see what I ended up with. I'm going to show you how to cross this plant, which is Vanessa, with this plant over here, which is Loderi Julie. The first thing we've got to do is choose the seed parent, and in this particular case, this will be Vanessa. So we find a bud that's just about to open. It hasn't fully opened, hasn't had an insect inside it. So if we take one of these buds here, is to take away the flower, and you're left with the stigma, which is at the very end. You then go to the pollen-bearing plant, and you find a plant with ripe pollen. Take away the flower, take away the pistil, and then with the ripe pollen, you wipe the ripe pollen on the end of the stigma. The next thing to do, having done that, you've done your cross, is to go to the label, the seed parent first, which is Vanessa, times Loderi Julie. Find the one that you've just pollinated, put a label on the plant, and then you leave that until January or thereabouts, when the seed is ripe, collect it, sow it, and then wait 15 years for the first flowers. This is one of my favourite rhododendrons, a hybrid of mine, bred over 30 years ago. Just a good all-round plant. Nice flowers, good foliage, disease-free, deep green, and overall spectacular in flower. Only problem is, hasn't got a name. This is one of my hybrid rhododendrons. Out of every 100 seedlings that you get, you probably end up with 4 or 5 are excellent, and you would register those. Probably 30 or 40 would be rejects. This is one of them. I've rejected this plant because it's got the flowers growing between the new growth. So I'm putting the plant to good use, and I'm going to use the leaves as a basis for a mulch on my other rhododendrons. I'm redistributing these leaves around the root ball of this plant. Most people believe that you can only grow rhododendrons on acid soil. Here we're in a limestone quarry, and it's alkaline soil. And the only way that these plants can be sustained on alkaline soil is by the recycling of the leaves. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take quite a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, before these leaves break down into a form of compost, producing a very, very healthy plant. During the springtime, I look at all my plants and see which ones are coming into bud. So in here, all these rhododendrons are flowering this year for the first time. This rhododendron here is flowering for the first time. Quite a nice hybrid. So that's one I would definitely keep, planted over in the far side of the garden. Again, a totally unique plant. When I look at the ones that I produced, some of the spectacular ones, I'm very proud. And I feel very thrilled that they're in my own garden. And I feel very, very happy when I see them in their full floral glory.
I'm always in awe of plants people like Colin for their dedication and application and meticulousness as they breed these extraordinary plants. But I was absolutely amazed by his throwaway remark that that was a lime quarry. It just shows that maybe many more of us who feel that we can't grow rhododendrons because we don't have the right soil should be giving it a go, or at least growing them in containers. I've got a rhododendron luteum growing in a pot, and that does very well because I use an ericaceous compost for that. Now, going from the sublime beauty of a rhododendron flower in its full glory to cabbages. I like to eat red cabbage with my Christmas dinner, and now is the perfect time to sow them. And that applies to all brassicas, whether it be red or green cabbages, broccoli, cauliflowers, whatever type, now is a good time to sow them for winter harvest. I've got some modules which I recycle, and they are getting a little bit fragile now, so what I'm doing is doubling them up so they're a little bit stronger. And if I just fill them with a basic potting compost, peat-free, I've added a little bit of vermiculite to open it out. The one thing the seed compost doesn't need to be is too rich. So just fill up the module like that, and then get the seeds. And brassica seeds tend to be quite large, so easy to handle, if not quite so easy to see if your eyesight is like mine. Ah, there we go. This is red drumhead, a nice red solid cabbage. Now what I'm aiming for are just 2 or 3 seeds per module, and I'm going to remove all but one. And what I'm looking to end up with is one strong plant in each one. And that can then be just covered over lightly. Label it. I will give this a really good soak. This can stay outside and will be perfectly happy, but it can go on a windowsill or in a greenhouse, and you will get seedlings appearing in about a week, and they will be ready to prick out in 2 to 3 weeks' time. You then grow them on in a larger pot, ready to plant out towards the end of July. Now, we've had a film sent to us from a viewer in Lucerne in Switzerland, who has done something magical inside his flat.
Hello, welcome to my garden. My name is Dimitri. I live in a flat. I don't even have a balcony. I don't have the luxury of owning my own garden. So I had to get creative, and I made the green wall that you see behind me. The concept, I got it from the French botanist Patrick Blanc, who is the inventor of all those vertical gardens all over the world. I was so fascinated by what he does that I really had to do something similar in my flat. I have an aquarium at the bottom of the wall that serves as a water reservoir. There is a pump inside that pumps the water through a hose up the wall. And as a planting medium, I have this felt that is a recycled material from the fabric industry. The water runs through it and runs down back again in the aquarium, so it's a closed system. Usually plants that grow on cliffs on really steep surfaces or epiphytically on trees in the tropics, usually those plants, they adapt quite well to those conditions. The question people often ask me is that if it stinks. Well, I do not think it stinks. It smells like mosses, or, you know, when you go into a greenhouse that was just watered. For me, it's quite pleasant smell, but I guess, well, this is everyone's taste. Alright, so I hope you liked my garden. I hope that I could inspire some people that live in a flat to give it a try. It's really fun.
I love Dimitri's calm ambition to take such a big idea and just very straightforwardly create it in a small flat is really inspiring. And all the films that you've been sending in have been a joy, so please don't stop. One little reminder is if you're using your phone, don't hold it upright, turn it on its side so we can show it better on the TV screen. Now, at this time of year, traditionally, was when everybody cut their box hedges and topiary. And it was easy. Box was one of those plants that was really reliable. You trimmed it at the beginning of June, and that was about it. You didn't have to worry about it anymore, and it looked great. But box blight has reared its ugly head, and we have the box caterpillar, which is also causing havoc to box plants, particularly in the southeast of the country. And here at Longmeadow, we've lost at least half our box hedges to box blight, and box has become a plant that is increasingly difficult to grow. But if you are growing it and you want to keep it looking good, then now is the time to give it a trim. Because if you cut at the beginning of June, the last risk of frost is over, and also it gives the new growth time to harden off before you get the resurgence of blight in August and September, because what blight likes are two things: soft growth and open wounds. And also you don't want to cut it if you think it's going to rain in the next 2 or 3 days. But lovely dry weather, that's the time to do it. Now I've got a bucket here filled with disinfectant, and I just keep dipping the shears into that so I'm not bringing blight in, and if there is any blight, I'm not taking it away with me. And I'm just giving a very light trim. The idea is to crisp it up. I'm not trying to cut it back in any way. I don't want it to get smaller. It's just to take off the new growth like that. Now, obviously, you can do this with hedge cutters, but I really enjoy using a good pair of shears. You can keep the blades really sharp, and that's important for the health of the plant. A ragged wound is much more likely to let in the fungus or an infection. And then just clear it back. But the idea is that by going all over it and then doing the sides, you get that sharp definition that box hedges give you better than any other plant. Now, a couple of years ago, Joe went to visit a garden which is about as different from Longmeadow as could be imagined. It's on the coast, it's completely exposed to the elements, and very beautiful.
Welcome to Foamley, a stunning coastal garden packed with exotic plants, offering breathtaking views over the coastline of North Devon. It's fantastic to see so many plants from around the world thriving here on this challenging and exposed sloping site. Foamley is the home of Beth Smith, a keen gardener and plantswoman who's been cleverly curating this very special garden for 17 years. Beth, this is a stunning garden, absolutely beautiful, I have to say. An incredible view. But it's a tricky site. It's incredibly exposed, it's on a slope. It must be quite difficult to garden here.
I started with very little knowledge of coastal gardening. And of course, when you start a coastal garden, you have to ensure windbreaks. There were the tamarisk hedges and the fuchsia hedges, but I introduced more hedges.
But the tamarisk hedge is beautiful. Has that been there a long time?
I'm almost sure that it was planted when the house was built in 1902. I had a friend cut it with a chainsaw right to the base, right to the ground, and within a month it was shooting again.
Well, I love the red stems. You don't imagine the new growth is going to be so beautiful.
It is very beautiful. It waves in the breeze. It's very beautiful, and it's very important to the plants behind it.
And the hard landscaping and these paths and walling, and you've used slate throughout, so you've used the vernacular.
Yes.
And you've put that middle wall in there.
Yes, that's an extra wall for soil retention, because over 30 years the soil had slipped down the slope, so we had to drag it back. We had a local craftsman builder come and add a dry stone wall. I had 50 tons of slate delivered on an empty garden. It took nearly 3 months to do.
And then the paths are more slate. I mean, everything's slate here. I mean,
yes, the shillet that you see on the paths is the leftover from all the work. But there were some big slabs which were used for steps so that we could actually come and go from top to bottom. And then at one point, the craftsman said, "Would you like a rockery?" So I said, "Well, yes, I'd love a rockery." And it's become my favourite part of the garden.
And you have a huge range of plants from all over the world.
Yes, from all over the world.
So you're a plant collector, really, aren't you? You're a plant fiend.
Yes.
Beth, the view is just stunning, but you have to respect a view like that, and you have done with your garden. Your garden's a collection of plants, but you still thought about how it connects to that extended landscape.
Yes, it's a borrowed view, and it is our water feature. So we have to major on the water feature.
I'd love to have a water feature like that, I have to say. That is some water feature. It's fabulous.
Yes.
This agave americana is just such a fantastic architectural specimen. Beth bought it for £1 in a small little pot, and look at it now. It's absolutely huge and looks brilliant next to this aloe striatula, which she says is pretty hardy as long as you've got really good drainage. A very exotic combination in the rockery part in the garden, right at the top here. And these plants have responded to the microclimate really well. That's the way Beth designed the garden. She didn't come up with a plan. She's had to respond to what she's got. Now, this plant is Phlomis russelliana, and it's commonly available. A lot of us grow it. It's just one of Beth's national collection. And I love the way she's integrated these plants into the garden rather than growing them separately in a botanical border. And here we've got a great composition. We've got the frothy Alchemilla mollis next to the Cape daisy, the lovely Osteospermum, and they lead the eye up to this wonderful Phlomis, which is in full bloom at the moment. The bees are absolutely loving it. And in the winter, it'll keep its nice structural form, silhouetted against the low winter sun. It looks absolutely beautiful. And then cut it back in spring. It's a herbaceous form, and it'll just spring up again. And I think that those three plants look just great together. Now, this is a shrubby Phlomis, so it develops a nice woody framework. Reaches about 1 metre tall and has these lovely soft pink whorls of flower against these soft sage green leaves. So next to it we've got Eryngium planum, which is green now, but it'll turn a sort of silvery metallic colour when it flowers. And then beyond it, the graceful arching oak grass of Stipa gigantea. And then the eye is drawn up to the spine of that echium at the back there. And really this composition is about the different forms of the plants combining nicely together. One of the key hard landscaping elements that Beth put in when she took charge of this garden was this absolutely gorgeous retaining wall made out of slate. And when you look at the details of the wall, you see these lovely little ferns growing out of it, and it's been backfilled with soil with excellent drainage, plenty of grit added. So plants like succulents and alpines are growing happily alongside each other. And I love this combination of the sedum, the fleshy leaves and the bright reds and greens coming through. And next to it, we've got this lovely little Artemisia, feathery, silvery foliage, and the combination is just beautiful. And then you remember where you are, because you can hear the crashing waves, and you turn around, and of course there's that amazing view, and you've gone from the micro to the macro. It's astonishing.
I think that shows that you can make a garden anywhere, and the secret is not to try and impose your garden onto the landscape, but to let the landscape dictate the garden and work with it. And the result, as we see, is something really special. Now, of course, there are a lot of people that don't have a garden at all, but that doesn't mean to say that you can't grow plants. And there are quite a few houseplants that you can grow in a container in a very limited space that are really easy to look after and are completely fascinating. And these are the succulents. And I've got a range of succulents here and a container, and I want to build a little garden that you could do in any room, anywhere, and still have the fascination of caring for a group of very beautiful plants. I've got here an old metal container that I want to use, but you can see I've drilled out plenty of holes in the bottom, because the most important thing, if you're growing succulents or cacti, they must have good drainage. The quickest way to kill them is to have them sitting in too wet a compost, and then they will rot. So that gives good drainage in the bottom, and I've mixed up a compost that is already very gritty. In fact, I've recycled some old compost because I want it to be low in nutrients. And it's far better to have too much drainage than too little. But some of these plants will grow in almost pure grit. Now, to stop it falling through the holes, I've got a few crocks. So just spread that out like that. And put a layer of compost on top. Now, I've got a whole selection of plants here that come from all over the world. But probably the most extraordinary is this. This is a kalanko, bronze sculpture. Now, if I take that out of the pot, that is my centerpiece. And like all succulents, its leaves are designed to be fleshy and to store water. That's how they've evolved to cope with drought. This is Aeonium tabuliform. So that is in front, and it will spread out. And it grows like a dinner plate. It doesn't grow high, it grows outwards. This is an echeveria. This comes from the Americas, and they're relatively easy to grow. So we'll pop that there like that. They can be outside in summer quite happily. They can take even a little bit of shade. All right, those are my three big dramatic plants for the moment. Now, I'm going to have a small dramatic plant. This, believe it or not, is a euphorbia. And like all euphorbias, is filled with a milky sap. So if you damage it, that will be an irritant, particularly to your eyes. So just be careful about that. And this is Euphorbia obesa. It does produce flowers. You can see them just beginning to appear from this pumpkin-like growth. Now, this is one of my favorites. This is an aloe. It's Aloe polyphylla. And as the leaves evolve and grow, they corkscrew out. But they will grow relatively slowly, so they're not going to crowd out this space. And aloes should always be planted at a slight angle. And that means that any water that gets into the middle of the plant will drain out, because it's the center of the plant that is most likely to rot. I've got an agave here. This is Agave Victoria Reginae. And like all agaves, it's got real spikes. So just watch out, either wear gloves or be wary. Right, a little bit more soil to even it out. Under there and here. And I will finish it up with a dressing of grit. So sprinkle a layer of grit over the whole surface and up around each of the plants. It means that any water goes straight through the grit, so there's no risk of the base of the plants, where they touch the soil, rotting. There we are. But obviously, whatever you can get and whatever you want to get, you can make up your own little garden. And this will grow perfectly well indoors, but do give it the sunniest window that you possibly can. If you're growing your succulents indoors, only water them when the compost feels bone dry. I'll be keeping these outdoors all summer and let the rain do the watering for me, but I will bring them under cover over winter, as the combination of cold and wet will do them no good at all. Now, we've had a film from Marion Hazelwood in Edinburgh, who is an artist, and her garden is completely central to her work.
When we moved here, this garden was really just a lawn with beds around the edges. We landscaped it to create lots of deep beds. I'm a botanical artist, so I wanted different kind of microcosms, shady bits, cool bits, sunny bits, to accommodate all the plants that I might want to work with. I've been doing a project on Aracema and the shoots as they come out of the ground. There's so much information packed in there. This is a bit later on. You can see it's all starting to unfold and unfurl. It's magical. I'm kind of fascinated by interesting shapes and forms. So we created this shady bed specifically to house our Aracema. This is Aracema griffithii. This is one of the leaflets in the act of unfurling. It's a trifold leaflet, so it's one that points up when it opens out and two that point down. I spend a lot of time getting down to the plant's eye level. I really like this aspect. So I've tried to have a lot of detail down low in the garden, as well as some height. So here's the shade doing its job on a lovely sunny day. Hopefully, we won't get as much blanket weed. This tree fern has just been in for 1 year. We're really excited to see the new croziers coming out. We had bees nesting in here just a month ago, but they've all gone.
I really like the way that that garden combines the intense awareness of detail, which obviously she as an artist feeds off, but also has a real sense of sculptural space. It shows that a garden can and perhaps should be a creative act that reflects your own personality. Now, this little strip of what looks like rough grass is in fact a wildflower meadow. And if you look, you can see the key to it. I sowed this at the beginning of last August, and it was a wildflower mix for partial shade to go along a hedgerow. And this is the key plant, this one here. This is yellow rattle. And yellow rattle is semi-parasitic on grass. So wherever yellow rattle thrives, grass dies back a bit. And grass is the enemy of the wildflower meadow. It swamps all the other much more tender and delicate flowers. So I'm delighted to see the yellow rattle flowering, the seeds will set, and gradually this grass will die back and the wildflowers will come in. Still to come on today's programme. We visit Frances as she shares the ups and downs on her allotment.
But there is something I've recently planted that I have got very high hopes for. Or should I say high hops for?
But first, we go back a couple of years. Because although all of us strive for perfection in our gardens, however hopeless an ambition that may seem to be, Paul Shum has taken that search for perfection entirely to another level.
My name's Paul. I live in a small village north of Birmingham. We moved into the property in 2015. When we moved in, the garden was pretty unloved. There was a small shed at the top corner. There was a few shrubs and the odd tree. I had this old conservatory base that we had to take out, so that was the first thing we did. Then I took the old shed out, the shrubs, and basically I stripped the whole garden to a blank canvas. Then I realised that the soil quality was really, really poor. So I had 15 tonnes of really good quality topsoil brought in, which they dropped on the drive at the front, and I had to wheelbarrow through, and it took me at least, I think it was about 4 days to do it. So the design, I started with a patio, which was a half-moon shape, and I've tried to replicate that through all the borders, and also with the grass, and it sweeps around the house, and also with the arbours. I've built those myself from scratch. They're a bit of an unusual shape, but I think they work quite well in my garden. I've always been interested in cottage-style gardens, which I've tried to create myself here. I've got a massive range of different sorts of perennial plants, and I haven't got a theme with a colour. I like to mix all the colours up. Probably my favourite plants are Thalictrum. I have about 7 varieties in the garden. My 2 favourites would be Thalictrum Ann and Thalictrum Elan, which grow really tall, and I feel that tall plants in a very small garden work really well. I've got my dahlias. I also grow quite a few sanguisorbas, which are an amazing plant, which always drum up a lot of interest when people come to see the garden. I think it's really important to work out what's flowering in the garden and keeping the garden going. So a good tip that I've learned myself is to go around other people's gardens at different times of years and see what's flowering and what's looking good at that time of year, and that's how I've sort of created my garden. In very early spring, I put a lot of bloodfish and bone meal down. In fact, in this garden, I've put about 30 kilos down this year, and I feel that that's why everything is flourishing in the garden this year. I also do a lot of staking, which takes a tremendous amount of time. I think it takes me about a month to put the stakes in. There's probably about 800 stakes in the garden. The key thing with staking is to get them in as early as you possibly can before there's any real growth on the plants. I deadhead every night. I spend about an hour deadheading the whole garden. I think it's very important to spend the time doing this for the plant's health and to encourage new flowers. I spend a lot of time in the evenings when the children are in bed, and sometimes I can come in at sort of 11 o'clock at night. I have a massive passion for my lawn. The key to a nice lawn is a bit of feed every sort of fortnight. Probably in the palm of your hand, that's all you need. Water it quite a lot. Believe it or not, I do cut it every day, much to my wife's dismay. I also use an old roller mower, which is absolutely fantastic. It gives this great effect in the garden. I haven't got a greenhouse, purely because I haven't got enough room for a greenhouse now with the planting I've got in the garden. So when plants get too large in the garden, I dig them up, I take root cuttings off them and plant the original plant back in. I save quite a lot of seeds. I like to save my delphinium seeds and Thalictrum seeds, which are hardier seeds, which I pot on and grow on and sell for the National Gardening Scheme. Garden means everything to me. I've got a massive passion for it, and I enjoy having people around and entertaining friends, and seeing that other people enjoy it is where I get my kick from, really. And I'm very, very proud of it.
I think Paul would be the first to admit that mowing your lawn every day is a bit extreme. But the truth is, all of us who've made our gardens are obsessives. We're all completely passionate about it. Now, I'm loving what is happening here in the grass borders, because this June, they are looking better than they ever have done, and that's because of the weather. because we had that very wet winter. There's lots of moisture down in the soil, and then it's been really dry. And what that's meant is that all the new growth has had enough moisture to keep it alive and healthy, but no more. So they're growing really hard. They're standing upright. Things like this Nautia macedonica, which normally, by this stage of the year, is flopping all over the place because it's too lush and we're having to stake it and it never looks quite right. Now looks perfect. And all across the borders, the grasses, the wildflowers, the planted flowers are just doing exactly what I dreamed of when I first planted this nearly 10 years ago. Now, we've had a film from an enterprising young man who grows superb and sometimes unusual vegetables.
My name is Ben Thornton. I'm 25. I have an urban allotment farm with my family in Plymouth. Back when I was 14, I became seriously ill when I was on holiday with my family. I was left paralysed from the chest down to my toes. I was told there was a high chance I would never walk again. Over the last couple of years, I have been researching and experimenting to find the best possible way for myself to grow with the littlest work. We start nearly all of our seeds off in the greenhouse or in the house, and then plant out once they're established. I have a passion for heritage and heirloom veg. It's the stories that get me every time. We're growing a potato from 7,000 years ago. We're also growing a squash from the 1800s. And there's one seed that is on my list to grow next year. It's a pea that was discovered in the tomb of Tutankhamun. It's called King Tutu, purple. So that one I will be growing next year. So 5 things I like to do in the garden. I like to multi-sow my seeds and plant quite a lot of them out how they are. I don't thin them. I like to use as much space as I possibly can. It has to be no-dig. Grow organic and let nature in. Growing has been a way for me to find myself again and to give my life purpose, as well as help control my mental health. With the help from my family and friends, we have achieved something I am very proud of. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ben, for showing us and sharing your garden. It's an inspiration. Now, it's time to change the planting in this particular raised bed. And what I'm going to plant into here is something called the 3 Sisters. Now, this is an ancient method of combining crops which comes from Central America. It goes back thousands of years. And it's based upon the combination of sweet corn, squash, and beans. And the beans would climb up the support of the sweet corn, the squashes would keep the ground cool, which was great for the corn, and the 3 worked well together. But what is really, really pertinent still today, after thousands of years, is the fact it means in a small space, you can grow lots of different crops. Now, I'm starting with the sweet corn. And I sowed this about 5 weeks ago, and sweet corn is pollinated by wind, so you never grow it in rows, because if you did and the wind went across the row, it would simply blow the pollen away, whereas if you plant them in a grid, it means that whatever direction the wind comes from, they will get pollinated and you'll get your lovely sweet corn cobs from August and September onwards. So we'll plant these out first. One there. Across like that. Get them in really firmly because these are going to be big plants. And this is the sort of spacing that you're looking for, somewhere around 18 inches to 2 foot. Get one there. there, and another one here. That is the basic grid. And then the next plant to go in is a member of the squash family. Now, because this is a small raised bed and not a big open field, I'm not going to plant a pumpkin or any of the big winter squashes, but a courgette, a summer squash. And I've got two types here. One is called Atena polka, a yellow-skinned courgette. The other is Tromboncino albenga. And it has got a very curious shape because it's long and then invariably swells out and curves round. And the point about it is completely delicious. Now, I'll only fit two in this bed because courgettes need room to roam and they will wend themselves around the base of the sweet corn. But the key thing about courgettes, wherever you grow them and however you grow them, is they need sunshine, like all squashes. They need really rich soil and water. Right, that's two of the three sisters. The third element are the beans. These are a French bean, a dwarf bean. It's a variety called purple teepee, lovely purple pods. And as regards spacing, just put one plant between each of the sweet corn. So one can go in there, like that, and one here. And again, firm them in well. And they leave a certain amount of nitrogen in the soil, which the sweet corn can benefit from too. Now, allotments are one of our great British institutions, and for many people, they can transform their lives. And it's time to rejoin Frances in her allotment down in Kent.
I've really been enjoying spending this extra time here on my allotment. It's actually been glorious over the past few weeks. We've had such a warm spring. And this time of year is just full of flowers that I love. The alliums are looking amazing, iris is just coming into flower here, and the nepeta is looking really beautiful. As well as that, the geums, which are beginning to go over slightly, but still make good cut flowers. And this whole area is my cut flower bed, which is amazing for brightening up my home, but also lovely just to come here and see a little bit of colour on the allotment. I think with vegetable gardening, it's a case of some you win and some you lose. And for me, the sweet corn that I sowed last time was a little bit of a loss. I sowed about 20 seeds and only 4 of them have actually germinated, and one of them isn't really a proper germination, I would say. And I think it was a case of the soil was too wet and it was just too cold. So what I did was I re-sowed a whole lot of them, and they've all germinated really, really well. Even though it was weeks later, they're all bigger than these ones here. So sometimes, even when you think you're getting ahead of the game, it doesn't always go exactly according to plan. But there is something I've recently planted that I have got very high hopes for. Or should I say high hops for? This, of course, is my hop plant. Now, it contains all of these tendrils, which are called vines. Essentially, it's a kind of vine, which have tiny hooked hairs that will climb up a rope. And I'm hoping that by the end of the year, this will be covering a good proportion of my shed because they grow at such a pace in one season. This one's called Prima Donna, and it's actually supposed to be a dwarf, but it's fairly big. Now, hops are actually herbaceous perennials. So every autumn I'll chop this back right to the ground, and in the spring it will reshoot from the base and I'll re-tie it in all over again. This is its first year. So I've planted it with a good dollop of manure and some compost, which they do like because they can be fairly hungry. They like a moist but well-drained soil in the sun and hopefully without too much wind. And the nice thing about hops is that as well as being beautiful, they're also fantastic for wildlife, especially butterflies. So for me, it's a must-have. But what I do need to do, because it's its first year, is let it start off gently. So I'm going to remove most of these vines and leave just 2, maybe 3, and tie just them in. Hopefully, by the end of the year, I will get a small harvest from this. But if I do that this year, then by next year and the following year, I'll get more and more hops. Now it just needs the plants to climb up. There are loads of other edibles that you can use as climbers that look amazing and are useful. Things like cucumbers, squashes, Malabar spinach, peas, beans, all kinds of things that you can use. If you have a spot that could do with something climbing up it, why not climb something that you can also eat at the end of the year? Today I have an even bigger task ahead of me. The parsnips, cauliflower and broccoli seeds I sowed last time have been overwhelmed with weeds. So now I am determined to do something about it. I've been advised by lots of allotment holders over the years about what to do with my weeds. I have couch grass, horsetail coming out of my ears. So I've come up with this. They're circular beds and it's an experiment and it's completely my invention, which aim to use all of the weeds and all of the muck I have lying around the allotment, pile them up, rot them down and make them work for me. I don't know if it will work, but I'm prepared to try anything to get on top of the problem. I'm going to create some beds here, into which I'll be directly planting vegetables. First, I'm going to layer up weeds and other materials. I've removed the roots of the perennial weeds to try and prevent them from regrowing. My idea being that this should rot down, releasing lovely nutrients, which will in turn feed the soil and my plants. That's the plan. Next, I'm going to add topsoil, the soil that I dug out from the trench originally. And on top of that, a layer of farmyard manure and a layer of compost. Now that's all done, and hopefully it will create a really nitrogen-rich soil once all of that rots down. But if I really want to stop those weeds coming back, I need to cover these mounds with something that will exclude the light. That will kill the weeds that are in the mound, but also stop new weeds from germinating. And I have 2 different materials to try and see which one works best. Over there, I've added a weed-suppressing membrane, or landscape fabric. This has got some plastic in, and normally I would not be happy about this, but I had it already lying around and wanted to use it up rather than send it to landfill. You can get biodegradable fabrics, which I will get next time. Here, I'm also trying straw. It's an environmentally friendly covering, and it will break down eventually to feed the soil as well. But as it's so windy here, I'm just making sure it stays where it's put by adding some strings as well to secure it. Now, I know they say that gardening is very evocative of memories, and usually people say it's tomato foliage that does it. But I have to say, this straw is taking me right back to being a kid and having guinea pigs. It's quite lovely. I'm going to leave this for now, but in a couple of weeks' time, when I bring out my seedlings that are hardening off at home, I'll cut some holes in the membrane and just make some holes in the straw and plant my crops in these mounds. Have delicious things to eat by the end of this summer. I love my herbs. Hyssop is great to eat and has really good uses as an antiseptic. Sage, or Salvia officinalis, is also a medicinal herb and makes a great essential oil, and it's absolutely delicious in a casserole. And fennel is not only a beautiful herb, but it's delicious with things like fish. Now, I'm quite crafty, and last year I made myself this drying rack just out of some squares of fabric, some plant canes, a bit of string and some bent wire, and it works really well. I'll just place the hyssop on here. Don't be tempted to cram it up or it will start to mould. It needs to have lots of airflow to really dry properly. But the lovely thing about this is if you dry things, then you'll have them for months and months and months. And right through into winter, even when things aren't growing, you'll have plenty to cook with. And then with the fennel, I tend to just put it in a bunch and hang it onto a hook on the ceiling. There we go. That's that. Good day's work.
I confess that I've always struggled drying herbs. However, I try and have a supply of fresh herbs for as long as possible throughout the year, and they also freeze well. And you may remember, about 4 weeks ago, I took some softwood cuttings from the narrow-leaf sage, which I love. And if I just cut one out like that, I should be able to show it's got roots. There we are, it has got roots. Look at that. A nice little plant, good root system. I can now pot this on, grow it for another month or two, ready to plant out towards the end of summer. At the same time, I also sowed some, and you can see that the seedlings have developed and they are now ready for pricking out too. And you could buy seeds now and sow them, and you could have yourself sage bushes ready for next year. Okay, that's a job to do. Here are some more for this weekend. If your garden is anything like Longmeadow, the weeds are growing like mad. And to keep on top of them, nothing works more efficiently than a hoe. Use its sharp blade to cut the roots just below the surface of the soil. Leave the vegetation on the ground and they will dry out and die. And ideally, you do this in the morning of a dry day. If you grow lupins, you can extend their flowering season by cutting off spent flower heads. Follow the stem down to a side shoot and remove it there. And this will put the energy into the new flowers rather than developing the seeds. At this time of year, apple trees will naturally shed excess fruit, and after the blossom we had this spring, we're expecting a huge harvest. But you should aid the process by reducing every little batch of fruitlets down to just 2. This way, you will get quality as well as quantity. Watering over the last few weeks of baking heat has become quite a job in itself. We don't water the borders in general. We sometimes water specific plants, or occasionally if a plant is flagging, obviously. But of course, the plants here in the Paradise Garden, the Mediterranean citrus, like the orange here, or the lemons, the olive trees, all love hot weather, but they still need water. And I give them a good soak once a week with a feed of liquid seaweed or homemade comfrey, and then I let them dry out. The biggest mistake is to give them a little bit of water every day. That does more harm than good. A really good soak so the water runs out the bottom of the pot, and then leave them be. Well, I'm going to leave you be now, because that's all we've got time for today. We'll be back next week at the earlier time of 8 o'clock. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.